Hey folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. So, 10 years ago, all of humanity suffered a collective 2.75 seconds of sensory deprivation. During that time, no one here saw, felt, tasted, or smelt anything. Every electronic device on the planet failed for the same period of time, so there are no records of what happened or why. This period of lost time is referred to as the event. In its aftermath, humanity picked itself up off the floor or crawled out of their wrecked cars and looked around, and the world was a very different place. It wasn't immediately obvious, but the first difference came only a few seconds after the event ended, when a baggage handler at O'Hare Airport by the name of John Chandler looked up and saw a Boeing 747 falling out of the sky after its electronics had failed, and he leaped up off the tarmac, snatched it out of the air, and guided it into a dead stick landing. He became the world's first superhero at that very moment. He would eventually take the name Atlas, fight the first superhero versus supervillain battle, found the world's first superhero team with the Chicago Sentinels, and become the face of American superheroes for the next 10 years. Now, all that didn't mean very much to Hope Corrigan, at least not until the tea time anarchist blew up a highway overpass right over her head and crushed her car. It was at that moment that Hope Corrigan had her own breakthrough, threw the overpass off her head, and went on to become the superhero known as Astra. That, my friends, is the premise of Marion G. Harmon's novel series, Wearing the Cape. It is part of the small but growing genre known as superhero lit. You can find a lot of it on Amazon in their ebooks. And while a lot of it is fairly derivative, I want to talk about Wearing the Cape because I think it takes a very interesting approach to superhero stories. It's very fresh, it's different, and I think a lot of people who are interested in doing comics, and specifically superhero comics, in the modern market could learn from reading it. It's always bad when an industry or just a genre becomes insular and it stops looking outside itself. It stops growing. It becomes purely derivative at that point. And at that point, it's just a matter of time until it dies. And I really feel, given what I know of the modern comics industry, which admittedly is not as much as some other commentators, that modern comics has become too insular. The big publishers just seem to be rehashing their most popular events, and comics' flagship genre, the superhero story, is barely being done outside of those two publishers. But it's thriving in this new genre on Amazon, so you have to wonder what's happening. And I think that Wearing the Cape does a lot of things that people looking to do their own superhero comic could learn from. The first thing it does is it updates the setting. A lot of times, modern superhero stories act like they follow a lot of the tropes established in ye olden days, some of which don't make a lot of sense anymore. One of the biggest ones in Wearing the Cape that has been disposed of is the secret identity. John Chandler was a known person. Like he was seen on security footage jumping off the tarmac and flying into the sky. He didn't have a costume on hand. He didn't know he was going to spontaneously develop superpowers after the event. And he, so everyone knew who he was. And that's true of most superheroes. I mean, even if they do break through in unexpected, isolated places, it's very easy to piece their identity together with facial recognition software and social media. There's going to be so much video, so much records of who was where at what times that people get found out fairly quickly. In fact, the main character, Hope, has a secret identity for only, I think, the first 3 books. She goes to pretty great steps to conceal it, in part because she's only 18 at the beginning of the story. But the fact is, sooner or later, there's going to be enough photos of her, enough people who know who she is in real life are going to see pictures of her, that people are going to put the pieces together. And so they just kind of dispose of that, and it actually makes the storytelling stronger in a lot of ways, because there's less fumbling about and worrying about, oh, what if people figure out who I am, and a lot of those tired kinds of story tropes. And there's a lot more focus on the adventure and the interpersonal relationships, especially because the various superheroes don't have to hide their identities from each other. Another trope that he disposes of is vigilantism. Almost all the superheroes in Wearing the Cape are licensed rescue workers, basically. Of course, they do a lot more than rescue work. They fight supervillains and things of that nature. But they go through a licensing process. They give testimony in court. They are accountable. And of course, it's not always possible to hold superhuman individuals as accountable as you would like, but there is still accountability. So some of the more tired superhero versus superhero tropes can be, kind of put aside that way as well. There's, no Batman building a brother eye or anything like that. Their work is government sanctioned, and they are accountable to the government. So instead of lots of overwrought melodramatic morality plays, you can focus a bit more on the high stakes action and adventure. So those are a couple of the tropes that he disposes of. Another thing that Harmon does that I think is really great in Wearing the Cape is he simplifies the origin story. The event is not the origin of every superhero, but it is a known fact that there were no superheroes before the event, and after the event, well, there were superheroes. So much like the X-Men, all superheroes and supervillains and whatnot have kind of a unified backstory in the event. However, nobody really knows what the event was. It's not like the X gene. It's not something you can put your finger on, and there's no records of what happened during it. So everyone just sort of puts their own interpretation on the event. They meet, for example, Astra meets a magician who goes by Dr. Cornelius, who says he met the supreme deity during the event, and that was when he awakened to his superpowers. And then other people, their understanding of the event is that it was some kind of cosmic alignment, or there's a number of different interpretations given to it. So unlike the X-Men, where humanity evolving or whatever always has to be a part of the story, the event can be whatever a character would make of it. So there's a lot more freedom in the kinds of ideologies and stories you can tell with the event, as opposed to with something like the X-Men. At the same time, while superheroes are unified by the event, they come by their powers when they undergo a strong emotional experience, usually something traumatic. So in Hope's case, she got powers and became Astra when a terrorist blew up a bridge over her head. On the other hand, we know that John Chandler became a superhero when he saw a plane falling. He thought, well, I have to do something to help them. And he was able to fly, and he got all the flying brick powers and the glories that go along with that. So each superhero has a different story of how they broke through and gained their powers. That's generally what superheroes are called in the universe of wearing the cape. They call them breakthroughs. Um, so while they have something in common with the event and the changed nature of humanity, they are also very different in the way they get their powers and how they manifest. And we even find out later, when they start doing alternate reality shenanigans, that the same person can break through under different circumstances and develop different powers. So there seems to be a lot of factors that go into making breakthroughs different. It's very interesting to think about, and it puts a new spin on how did your character get superpowers? And I would like to see, a little more of that in modern comics, and a lot less of this. Well, they're just really smart, and they got bitten by something radioactive, or must cybernetics or power suit or something like that. So yeah, more creativity like that, I think, is something that the comics industry could also learn from, especially indie comics, because again, the big two have a big following already, and you need to set yourself apart somehow if you want to tell these stories. So, and the third thing I think that Harmon does that you can really learn from, if you want to learn, you want a fresh take on the superhero genre, is he takes the superhero team books, and Wearing the Cape is very much a team book. Part of the conceit is that superpowers have a give and take to them. No one set of powers can solve all your problems. So you don't have, Superman, who it just seems like fix anything except magic, basically. It takes the team book, and it gives it a little more depth. All of the factors that go into making Wearing the Cape unique result in a team that has a lot more going to it for it than just the well, we took a bunch of people with abilities and we slapped them all together, which a lot of superhero team up books seem to have. The Justice League is just DC's highest profile superheroes. The Avengers are, whatever Marvel superheroes Marvel editorial wants to put a spotlight on. We learned early on in Wearing the Cape that these superhero teams are built and carefully fine-tuned in order to make the most of each of the members. So because hero identities are known, and because they're licensed and they're sanctioned, you can make the teams much more deliberately than just whoever our mutual networks of vigilantes can put together on a moment's notice or convince to join up. So there's a lot of intentionality to the team's composition, at least in terms of the problems they can handle. But at the same time, different power sets, because breakthroughs seem to be affected by personality, different power sets are going to come from radically different people. The kind of person who develops super speed is going to be very different, and perhaps a little flightier and seem a little more unreliable than someone who develops a very solid set of powers like indestructibility and flight and super strength. People who become supernatural super scientists, because that's what their inventor types are. They're basically people who do magic with a veneer of science. They are not going to think about the world in the same way that an actual magic user like Dr. Cornelius, who is convinced he transcended to another plane of reality and contacted the supreme being, are. People who develop energy projection powers and can throw fireballs or shoot lasers from their eyes are going to be very different from the people who can transform their body into living steel or living obsidian. So your teams have a very organic feeling, tension, and yet chemistry to them. People with different power sets interact with each other in unique and understandable ways because their powers are not just what Harmon thought would be cool to give to a superhero. They are an extension of their personality. And I sometimes feel like superheroes are just sort of a personality with whatever power set the creator thought would be cool. And there are some pretty good examples of that, particularly I feel like in the X-Men. Like Gambit's cool, but how does making things explode reflect, being a gambler or a Cajun lover or anything like that? His personality is really cool. His power set is really cool, but they're very separate. And in wearing the cape, the personality and the power set, although it may not seem like it at first in some cases, such as in the case of the magician Blackstone, they are actually very, very closely related. Blackstone is I believe, ex-Marine or Special Forces, but his powers are derived from his career as a stage magician. However, as you get to know Blackstone, it becomes very clear that the preparation and training and research and experimentation that went into making him a successful stage magician, and is now reflected, a skill set that is now reflected in his breakthrough powers, were very much an extension of what made him an excellent soldier and now an excellent leader and intelligence analyst for the team. So this combination of power and personality, I think, that is something that wearing the cape does a lot better than a lot of mainstream comics. Mainstream comics are they're very interested in their own legacy. So you have 1,001 Kryptonians. You have a bunch of takes on super speed that all seem to be, they seem to lack anything thematic between them, other than speed and maybe an emphasis on lightning. None of the characters have stormy personalities or anything like that. It's just purely rule of cool, and there's no attempt to tie it all together. And maybe that's fine for one or two heroes, but when you're doing a large scale world with dozens and dozens of characters, the thematic aspect of wearing the cape, I think, makes them stronger and more memorable. So those are just some things that I think that modern indie comic creators, especially if they want to do superheroes, could learn from wearing the cape. And I hope you will all go and check it out. I've linked to the Amazon store page of the first book in the description of this video. I'm not getting paid for this or anything. I just think it's a fun series of books. It starts off with becoming Astra and waging a battle of wits and power with a time traveling terrorist, and it just gets better from there. So even if you don't want to read it for the potential, inspiration for your own stories, you can read it for the story. I highly recommend that too. Anyway, that's about all I got for today. There's a like button and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.